is Janet Calloway. I'm currently a member of the University Musical Society Board of Directors. I'm also a proud member of a group of volunteers who have served UMS for nearly 45 years. That group was organized and began functioning in September of 1972 under the name Advisory, and that name hung on for a lot of decades. It was recently changed within the last, 2 or 3 years, I think, to become the Ambassadors. I'm honored to be here today in this gorgeous, rare book room at the Clements Library on the campus of the University of Michigan. I'm here with a truly rare individual, Ken Fisher, who has for 30 years, almost, not quite, served the university community and specifically UMS as president of UMS. Ken is indeed a rare gem and has made numerous contributions to the arts culture of this, not only our region, but the nation and internationally. At the end of June 2017, Ken will retire. As you know, Ken, the Ambassadors Group has recently embarked on a project that will document the history, the long history of the Advisory/Ambassador Group for 45 years. You've been here 30 of those 45 years. Think of it. Today, we're asking you to sit down and pause and reflect and share some of your stories, as only you can, about the evolution of this important group and its service to UMS. We want to couple your story and the Ambassadors' story and create a tribute to UMS, the Ambassadors, and of course, to you.
Oh, thank you.
So let's start at the beginning, when you and wife Penny and then 13-year-old son, Matt, embarked on this 30-year gig. I've been kind of interested in this project for a long time, so I've been prowling around.
Oh, my word.
And I wanted just to establish some of the things that you brought with you when you came. So, first of all, this light bulb, to me, is kind of an indication of the ideas and the energy that you brought with you. And this happens to be a publication that was put out several years before you came here. But do you recognize the handsome young fellow on the back? That's you, in front of the easel. And you'll notice there are 3 words on that easel. And whoever you were talking to got the benefit of your understanding of the importance of purpose, place, and people. And that kind of typifies what you've brought not only to the advisory, but to our community at large. So, let's start with your first impression of the advisory committee when you arrived in 1987 and some of the things that you did to take off from that first impression.
Well, I think it's important that folks should know that I really came to the arts as a volunteer. I was a board member of 3 organizations in Washington in the 1970s and 1980s. It wasn't until early, in fact, 1983, that I started to do concerts at the Kennedy Center. So I've always appreciated the role of volunteers. And when I arrived here, I saw a group of people eager to serve UMS. And in fact, I knew some of these people. When my wife Penny and I were here as graduate students in the late 60s, there were people wanting to serve. We had left in 1970, so the formal advisory committee had not yet started, but there were people eager to be helping out, and one of them was Lois Stegeman, whom I remember as she and her husband were involved in UMS, but also he was involved in real estate and so on. And so that was a wonderful reconnection for me to Lois. In fact, it was from her kitchen that a mutual friend of ours called me and said, get that application in by Monday, because your next job is in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
I'm glad you did.
UMS. So I was delighted that connection from the late 60s to when I applied for this position. But I saw a group of people sort of primed and ready to serve more. And then what do we do to help mobilize that wonderful group of people wanting to serve UMS? And how do we figure that out? So one of the things we did
I bet I know what you're going to say.
Well, you know, what prompted my writing this book on conferences and how do you design better conferences was my belief that things can happen when people get together and they listen to one another and they share ideas. And I was a facilitator for a lot of different retreats of organizations and annual meetings and so on. So one of the first things I thought of, why don't we get this group of people together and let's find a nice place to do it. And a member of advisory at that time was Ingrid Martin, who lived out in Barton Hills and had a boathouse of sufficient size that that advisory group could get in there. It wasn't too big, it wasn't too small, and there were windows on which we could tape
So you brought your easel
flip
with you?
charts. Man, I'm a flip chart carrier.
Me too.
And what I remember is that we just generated a number of ideas. I don't remember a lot of them, but certainly getting more engaged was one of the things that they were clearly interested in doing.
So the boathouse story is one that resonates with lots of people because we've heard it so many times, and it's so good to hear it one more time.
I hope they felt good about what happened at the boathouse, because it was a sort of energy builder for the group, and certainly gave me a sense of how they wanted to become engaged.
Do you remember roughly how many people there were?
I think there must have been 20 or 22 people. I remember, you know, we got a lot done, and it was small enough to really look, you know, crowded, but folks were comfortable. I think we brought in food, and it was a beautiful setting there.
Just like this.
This is magnificent.
Yes. When you began your tenure at UMS was in financial trouble. You recognized that it needed to expand sources of revenue, attract government and foundation and more individual donors, really to handle this crying need for an improved bottom line. Can you talk a bit about what advisory did to support that, and particularly the Leonard Bernstein 70th birthday tour with the Vienna Symphony?
It was remarkable. And so just understand, you were right. We needed more government money, like you said, more foundation support, local businesses and so on, and then have more people become engaged. Mm-hmm. And so the two keys there were corporations and individuals. And so we had this wonderful opportunity. Actually, Leonard Bernstein and the Vienna Philharmonic came to do the first two concerts at Hill Auditorium that I was involved with. Talk about intimidation. I mean,
why not remember the light bulb?
Here's Leonard Bernstein. In fact, I brought my mentor, Patrick Hayes, to sort of hold my hand, and he said, "No, you're on your own." So there I was, looking Leonard Bernstein in the eye. I was down on my knee, he was in a chair, and we talked about the opportunity for the following year, because he and I knew that he would be going out on a limited North American tour with the Vienna Philharmonic to celebrate his 70th birthday. And that's when I said, "Mr. Bernstein, we'd love to have you back next year." And he said to me, "Ken, I love this town, I love the people of this town, and I love this hall. We'll be back." And a few weeks later, he determined that the tour would be in only 4 cities: New York, Washington, Toronto, and Ann Arbor. Well, then what do you do with that rare opportunity, not only to celebrate his 70th birthday, but Hill Auditorium's 75th?
Lots of things came together at that point.
And that's where the advisory committee was really, how do we make this thing happen and have it be exciting? Very expensive proposition.
I would think so.
Having that orchestra with Bernstein. And so we got 41 local businesses to give. Now, the way they got motivated was certainly with help from advisory. We set the stage at Hill Auditorium like an orchestra. We did it each day for 5 straight days in the afternoon. And advisory helped put that whole thing together along with our development department. And so corporate representatives with their spouses would come and sit, and nobody was in the seats.
So looking out into
the seats. And then after our presentation, which included everybody closing their eyes at the end and listening to the 4th movement of Brahms' Fourth Symphony.
Oh.
Da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
And everybody was startled. I said, that's exactly what you're going to hear with Bernstein conducting that orchestra that you heard on the tape. Now, where do you want to sit? And I'll never forget that Ron Weiser, first hand up, says, I want those 40 seats right up there at $125 a piece.
And this was in 1989?
This is 28 years ago, 1988.
88.
And so we were able to get 41 companies to purchase 900 seats. But where advisory really helped us was we wanted to motivate individuals to put up that kind of money, which they really hadn't done before. How do you add value to Bernstein, the Vienna Philharmonic at Hill Auditorium, dinners in people's homes? And so, as I recall, we had 25 volunteers, many of them advisory members or joining with others, that hosted dinners. Now imagine you're then assigned to a home. And you drive there, and you're in your tux, and you get out of the car, and you go in and you have a wonderful dinner. Then a university bus comes to pick you up, and that bus has a number, like number 5, and that group of people at that home hops in the bus and comes to Hill Auditorium to enjoy a fantastic concert. And as they leave, each person is given a little box with cake in it to celebrate both Bernstein's 70th birthday, Hill's 75th. And you know who distributed those cakes? The members of the Pioneer High School Orchestra, because they were looking to gain attention to the fact that they were going to go to Vienna the following summer. So the centerfold of our program book was Vienna sends its best to Ann Arbor sends its best to Vienna. And so this was a way of raising the profile of that orchestra and having people then want to see what they could do to help. So after the concert, then you'd find bus 5 or bus 4, you'd head back, and the advisory committee people who hosted these events had cordials and dessert. It was a wonderful evening. And so that was an enormous success. And you can imagine how advisory members would feel being part of something that was so successful and gave them an additional way to be engaged with UMS. Sure. And we couldn't have charged that amount of money. I mean, the Berlin Philharmonic concert
this weekend
here in November, you can get a good seat for $125, and that's 30 years later. But that really cemented for so many people, you know, this was a world-class event of UMS. Bernstein died 2 years later. He never went out again. But that began a corporate sponsorship program, and you know, development eventually was able to add a corporate representative, and but it helped local businesses understand that, you know, we can use these events as a way to reward employees, cultivate clients, thank our customers, and we've had a very successful corporate program ever since then.
Yes.
But we couldn't have done it without advisory's help in setting the stage, literally setting the stage for those companies, and then everything that advisory did to be sure that those dinners would be successful. And you know, that was so important to where we then were able to take off with our corporate sponsorship program.
Well, you've mentioned the development function, and 1989, as I understand it, was a year of transition and a very important year. You hired Kathy Arcure to become the development director, and as she really understood the reality that advisory events were becoming a cost item to UMS, and that needed to be reversed so that fundraising through advisory became an important thing.
Well, it became clear to me because as a board member of these organizations in Washington, what my role was to raise money and support the executive director. And so I saw that as a very important function for volunteers to be involved in. But they need guidance. They needed a professional. And where Kathy had a unique set of experiences was she had been at the Washtenaw Community College. She was vice president for development and external relations. And so Kathy brought this knowledge and expertise in corporate, foundation, government, and individual. And that was a depth of experience that we didn't have at the time. Another facet of that that's interesting is that because she was so prominent, both as the food editor of the Ann Arbor News, but as this prominent person at Washtenaw, I needed to check with a few folks. How would this be if I invited Kathy? And one of them was Joe O'Neill.
Oh, Joe.
Joe was the local construction company owner, and Joe said, "Ken, I think that sounds like it would be a good transition, but she needs to be able to be successful. I got to come and see what her office would be like." And what that led to eventually in 1991, Joe and the construction industry of Ann Arbor were involved in a $200,000 project to make sure we had air conditioning and some good offices and carpeting and so on. And that industry contributed $150,000 in materials, supplies, and labor towards that project, and then individuals contributed the rest. The reason I bring that up was when you're going to enhance your development operation, you need to have the right conditions. You need some privacy in the offices where you're going to be calling. And Joe understood that, and we just took off from there. Kathy was such a critical addition, but boy, did she understand the role of volunteers.
Yes. Well, and in that regard, after you appointed her and she understood the importance of the fundraising function for the advisory committee, you then created the position of liaison from the development department to the advisory committee. And the first person to hold that was actually a good friend of mine. I had her son in kindergarten many, many years ago, Judy Fry.
Well, the Frys, as a family, were wonderful in welcoming Penny and me. The first summer that we were here in 1987, they had I think they have an annual gathering, and so I was getting to know Judy even then. And then to recognize that she and Kathy were great friends, and the importance of a liaison person. And that is critical, because you always want the group of volunteers that you have to be connected to the organization, to be serving its purposes, and to have that reminder of we're attached.
Right, we are part of this community.
Body. Is really important, and we've never had a problem with that in the way that some other organizations have, and so I've always appreciated that advisory, and its leadership over the years have been so supportive of the mission of UMS.
Well, I think that's, as I understand it, over the years, that people in that group have felt that was their primary function. So. And speaking of primary function, one of the critical times that you called on advisory committee members and a lot of other people to support your vision was when you realized that the revered May Festival was no longer going to be financially sustainable. Sadness in the land, but the reality that there needed to be a change from that as a major fundraiser, which it wasn't at that time, to some other major fundraiser that would energize and fulfill the function of a greater revenue. Can you talk about advisory role in the transition from May Festival to Ford Honors?
Well, and just I think a bit of background is useful, as this is an historical document, that the May Festival had been so successful in Ann Arbor, in part because we had a long-term relationship with a specific orchestra.
Yeah, the Philadelphia.
Well, Chicago and the Boston Festival before that, but for 49 years with the Philadelphia Orchestra, which we hoped would have gone on forever. But they changed their mind with the new conductor, and that was really the beginning of the end of the festival, when we could not establish a relationship with another great orchestra where it was a direct relationship. So we began to have orchestras that were already on tour. They had limited repertoire, and we didn't always get an orchestra of the class of Philadelphia. We ended up pulling people together, including a number of, at that time, advisory, to do a SWOT analysis. What are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of the May Festival? And in a nutshell, what people loved about the festival was it was at the end of the season. We had stars. We had fun, we had food, and it was a wonderful gathering.
You could get
of
dressed
folks.
up. No.
But what was the downside? Well, the downside was the calendar, that we were bringing these great orchestras in, and no students were around to benefit from it because of the change in the university calendar. And the other thing was we were losing money on it. You can't continue to lose money. You have a very good regular season, and you can imagine staff is all excited. You know, we made it, we're in the black, and then to face a May festival that would then lose $100,000 a year over the course of 10 years, that certainly is a morale downer.
Yeah.
And so could we shift from having a $100,000 a year losing proposition financially to one that could actually garner us, you know, a bottom line that was positive? Well, a couple of things could happen if you did that. One, could we find a corporate sponsor whose gift to our education program would be of sufficient size that we could put their name on something that could then have a life for a number of years? And Ford Motor Company had been a longtime friend
Yes.
of UMS and a friend of our education program. And so we formalized this relationship with them. So that was a big boost. But if we could have a dinner that would also accompany it, that could be a money-making dinner, that would enhance it even more. And that's where the advisory committee came in. For the next 20 years, it was advisory committee members who took on the role of let's do it. Let's design it. Let's figure out what it's going to be. Let's study who the artist is, whether it's Yo-Yo Ma or Renee Fleming, or Jesse Norman or Van Cliburn. Let's do something special with this. And, you know, it was fantastic. 20 years of what we called the Ford Honors Program, with the advisory front and center with that enterprise.
Yeah.
Bravo.
Bravo. Well, we'll talk about Bravo in a minute. But something that I know has always been front and center in your vision for UMS over the years has been diversity, both in programming and in audience. In what ways did the advisory committee support that vision that you so desperately and wanted to promote?
We're housed in Burton Memorial Tower, and it's quite literally an ivory tower.
Yes, it is.
And we hold that over there. But I was very lucky to be mentored in Washington, D.C. by a man named Patrick Hayes. And Patrick played a major role in the desegregation of the theaters of Washington from the 40s and 50s. And then when he had established his own nonprofit organization, his first board chair was Todd Duncan, the first Porgy and Porgy and Bess.
Oh, okay.
And you look at that photo of the two of them in 1965, a small Irish man and a very large African-American gentleman who was teaching at Howard University, and they had their arms around each other and said, "This is the future of the arts here." And it made a huge statement. And along with that, that vision, that photo, were the words, it was the word EINO, E-I-N-O, everybody in, nobody out. And so if you want to know what the arts were going to be like in Washington, that's the way it was going to be. So I arrive, I'm in an ivory tower, I can see that we've often go it alone at UMS, you know, when you have high standards and so on. Why are we'd be working with this group or that group? We would be best going it alone. I never felt that was the way things should be. We needed to get out of that tower and into the communities of shared heritage in our region. And one of those communities was right here in Ann Arbor, the African American community. And so there were times when we got together with that community to talk about how could UMS better serve that community, listen to it, learn from it. And as a result of a very simple suggestion that you look within your own organization and find out who are people that have been active, but you may never have called upon them. And yet they love the organization. And other groups had recognized their leadership qualities and the contributions that they could make. So we made a point of of reaching out to people already involved in the organization, people like Letitia Bird and Joetta Mile and Barbara Meadows. And one of the suggestions of a diversity consultant we had was, if people have not always felt welcomed in your hall, how do they feel welcomed? What do people do at church when strangers come in? They put out their hand and say, welcome, it's good to see you. And so what our advisory committee did was to invite Delta Sigma Theta, African American Women's Sorority, and the Links, Inc., service organization. How about if the three of our organizations work together to greet people at Hill Auditorium as folks enter? And I got to tell you, it made a huge impact. It was just because you would come into the hall and you'd see people that looked like you, welcoming you on behalf of UMS. This was a wonderful thing. Well, then that led then to a diversifying of the advisory committee in a way that I found very hopeful and promising, as the three women I mentioned all got involved in some way. You know, of course, another area that advisory was helpful to us from the get-go was serving as ushers in school day performances. And we started with fourth grade opera. You got to start someplace. We started with fourth grade opera and did that for several years, so that every kid in Ann Arbor who's in the fourth grade was coming to see a New York City National Opera Company production. But as we diversified our programming, because, you know, once you begin to listen and learn and find out that what is meaningful to certain communities is not necessarily one or two artists. It's the genre, it's jazz, it's gospel, it's dance, African drumming that can really speak to folks. Yes, we've had Andre Watts and Jesse Norman and Wynton Marsalis for a while, but there's so much more than that. So by listening, we then diversified significantly our programming, and that meant that we had much more to offer the schools in the kind of programming that would be available in the school day performance. Because generally what we did, if you had a 2-hour-long Kodo drumming performance, we'd reduce that to an hour's length, because we're told by educators that's what makes sense to kids.
The buses need also.
And so our school day performances became much more relevant to schools, not just in Ann Arbor, but in Ypsilanti and to Detroit and throughout the region, because the teachers could use these events to talk about geography and to talk about cultures in these areas, talk about immigration, talk about all the kinds of things that schools want you to be talking about. But this was another vehicle through the arts where so many kids, I get it now, I see. And that's been the case now ever since, well, in the early 90s, we began to do a bit.
Well, you hired Ben Johnson in 1995.
We hired Ben Johnson, who just took this to a whole new level.
And he was Director of Education and Audience Development.
Correct.
That now has been changed to Education and Community Engagement. Kind of an important shift. And UMS is noted for its remarkable programs in both the education, the performances that you described, teacher workshops, arts integration, not only for arts teachers, but for all kinds of classroom teachers. And that was the vision of really creating the payoff on the education program.
Well, we just got smarter about it, and certainly with Ben being able to bring not only his interest in education at all levels, adult and K-12 in university, but there was his heart and soul into building relationships with the various communities with whom we'd not had the kind of relationship that we ought to have had. But in going out and with the Arab community, with the African and African American communities, the Americas, especially Mexico and South America, but also Canada, and then the diversity of Asian populations. And so we built enough of a connection with these communities that we're actually able to do festivals over the course of various seasons with each of these different communities in each of 2 years over an 8-year period. And again, advisory was critical to welcoming a whole set of diverse people coming from all over the area, and having everyone feel welcomed. And we couldn't have done it without advisory's support in making those school day performances extra special for the kids.
Yes, and we still do that.
You still do it.
That's right.
We couldn't. I mean, what did we made an estimate that we would need to have hired 4.5 full-time people to come anywhere near the equivalency of the amount of time you put in. But that's not what it's essentially about. It's who's doing it and the
And how it
personalities
supports
they have
UMS's
and how it supports us.
focus. A while back, I heard you say the word bravo, and that made me think about another use of the word bravo besides at the end of a magnificent
Right.
performance, and that is the gem of a cookbook that was created over a 3-year marathon period, led by Kathy Arcure and members of the advisory committee, but also including other people who were, at least not then, advisory committee members. Some of them did go on and become advisory committee members. So with the subtitle of Recipes, Legends, and Lore, I love it. What did that gift to UMS, so carefully constructed and magnificently received, what was the meaning of that for you and the staff?
Well, you're going to love it when you hire a person who's so much better known as the food editor
Right.
of the Ann Arbor News.
It's kind of inevitable, wasn't it?
Her day job. And just the joy in knowing that a project could be found which could combine Kathy's interest in food and then her role as a director of development and having so many friends and colleagues that she could mobilize. I mean, with the help of leadership from advisory. I think there were like 220 people involved in this effort, and we had recipe testers, we had researchers, we had writers, and these were people at the top of their game.
Yes.
I mean, we were so lucky. And the result then was in this award-winning 200-plus page hardbound book that I still make available to artists and to friends and to we made it available to all the journalists that are here with the Knight Wallace Journalism Fellows Program, and I believe we sold something like 11,000 copies of it, which is a lot. It was successful in so many ways. And one of them was that, again, this building of a bond between the people who put it together. And, one of the things that I remember from a retreat of advisory as they were looking to how can we be supportive and so on, the word joy came up. And I must say, how advisory has had that word be emblematic of what happens to people when they get together in advisory. I was just at a session last night, one of the social affairs with that Dallas Dort and his wife Sharon Peterson Dort sponsored in their home. There must have been 35 or 40 people there, but it was how much they enjoyed being together, how hard they had been working as volunteers for UMS. But you got a real sense these folks like each other.
Yes.
They're learning from each other. It was a diverse group, as I've seen in advisory. And I just loved being able to witness this and feel good that we've come a long way since the group was founded in 1972.
Yes. Well, and I was part of that strategic planning process in 2009. Phyllis Herzog was chair of the advisory committee at that point. Cindy Straub championed the notion of creating the liaison at this point. championed the notion of creating a strategic plan, and our own Bev Seaford, a member of the advisory committee, facilitated that process. And yes, among the 4 goals, in fact, I'll read it to you.
Yeah.
Ensure we work effectively, efficiently, and joyfully
Amen.
within the advisory committee and with the UMS staff and board.
Yeah.
That was one of the 4 goals, and then a strong mission statement that really positioned the advisory committee to be a service arm of UMS. So what did that mean for you, for the staff, and for the board?
Well, as a guy that used to design retreats and facilitate them, I was blown away by the quality of the design of this meeting, which we had at the University of Michigan Golf Club upstairs. But the quality of the discussion, how well it was led, and then the conclusion of the mission, which was our mission is to support the mission of UMS.
Yes.
And I think we'd gotten some clarity around our mission at that time, which was to inspire individuals and to enrich communities by connecting audiences and artists in uncommon and engaging experiences. We felt good about that, and we still feel good about
Yes.
it. We're in the experience business. And to have a group of wonderful volunteers reaffirming why we exist is to support the mission of UMS. And I don't remember the other, you had a mission, and then there were 4.
Actually, I can tell you.
You got them? Well, I
do.
think these are worth your reading because they all resonated with wonderful next steps.
Yeah, and I think Bev was so smart in terms of, we got to boil this down and put it on one page.
Yeah.
And I remember talking with you and some of the other members of the M team, and whereas many strategic plans are voluminous and go up on shelves, this one I think stuck around for a while. I'll read it. 4 goals. Increase the awareness of and participation in UMS programs. Become more closely aligned with what was going on as the major focus of UMS. Raise money to support UMS education programs. Yeah. They don't come free, and UMS has always looked at that as an important part of its functioning. But if we can raise some money to support those programs, so much the better. Continually enhance the volunteer experience, and that's what you're talking about. And the last one, which I already read, but I'll read it again. Ensure we work effectively, efficiently, and joyfully within the advisory committee and with UMS staff and board.
One of the outcomes of that retreat was my going to the board of directors and saying, if we could do as well when we have our strategic plan coming up. And I think we had a good strategic plan, but this one was so on target and on one page. And it's something then you can be referring back to. And look, how many years ago was that? What I remember was the outcome of that is one that has been taken so seriously by now the ambassadors, but that really resonated with me and with the board, that we've got a wonderful group of people here who really understand what we need is their support of our mission in a variety of the ways that you've identified here.
You mentioned advisory ambassadors. The change to the name ambassadors, how does that reflect for what you probably have had as your vision of this group forever?
Well, I think there was like a little wave of questioning of, we're really not advisors. We're called the advisory committee. Is there a better word that describes what it is that we do? And I'm really very pleased with ambassadors because I think it's so much more descriptive. These are representatives, as an ambassador would be for a country, an advocate for. The kind of presence that you want in communities, talking about what it is that we do. There's a diversity of those people talking about you, but they all have in common a focus on the mission of what we do. I know that there were other names discussed, but I'm so happy that we landed on this one because that's what you do.
Okay, that fits.
As ambassadors. Yeah, it really fits better than advisory.
Yeah. Yep. Ken, if in a few years somebody said, "Hey, Ken, I know you used to be president of the University Musical Society. I heard they have a group called, I don't know, Ambassadors Advisory, but ambassadors now." And you could boil it all down. When they asked you, so who are they and what do they do? Could you tick off a few things that you would reply a few years hence?
Well, I would say, it's a magnificent group of dedicated volunteers who, without whom we wouldn't have an education and community engagement program. Amen, hallelujah, and I can tell them why and what you've done. It's a group that has been transformative for the way in which we raise money at UMS. And I think of Bravo, the cookbook. I think of Ford Honors program. I also think of On the Road, which was another
Yes, we didn't even touch on that, did we?
initiative of the ambassadors. But I would also want to say it is a group of some of the most talented, dedicated, diverse group of people bringing their collective commitments and talents together for the benefit of UMS. It's a great organization, and you should consider joining it. That's what I'd be saying to someone. I think the future is bright for the ambassadors. We'll have a change in leadership, but I can't imagine whoever succeeds me not wanting to take even greater advantage of this highly talented, fascinating, dedicated group of volunteers. It's just the evolution of it has been just like this, I don't know what we would do without it. So it's been a great pleasure being part of advisory and now ambassadors, and kind of on the side watching, but just terrific.
Thank you. Ken, I know that this is a very busy year, your final year here, your usual busyness, which we've all wondered about how does he do that, coupled with all the events and special concerts and the sorts of things that are honoring you for your long service, bringing the light bulb to the arts community for 3 decades here in Ann Arbor. On behalf of the many hundreds of people who have been members of First Advisory and now the Ambassador Group, we want to thank you for sitting down and sharing and telling your stories as only you can tell them. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.